Hello, YouTube! Today I'm going to be chatting about some tips for sketching portraits. So what that means is we're talking about sketching tips, not full, in-depth, finished drawing, not highly representational, more what I'm going to call my less is more strategy in working on being able to take an image of a person and in a relatively reasonable period of time render a drawing that somebody could look at the picture and clearly see that it was created from that. Some of the things I'm going to be going over in the beginning include my strategy for drawing teeth, which I know is a pain point for a lot of people who are even comfortable drawing faces. They always feel like teeth end up looking like a bunch of chiclets sticking out of someone's face, and we don't want that. I will quickly go over just the basic strategy right now of drawing a generic face, but there are a million resources that discuss this both on YouTube and visuals if you just Google it. Basically, you draw an oval that's narrower at the bottom and wider at the top, and then halfway down that oval you draw a line for where the eyes go. You draw a line straight down the middle so that everything is drawn evenly. From the line that you drew for your eyes, you cut this space in half, and that's the line for your nose. Then from that line to the chin, cut it in half again, that's the line for your mouth. The width between the eyes is the same width as a single eyeball. When you're looking straight onto a face, the ears line up with the eye line at the top and the nose line at the bottom. Again, it depends kind of at what angle you're looking at a person, but that is generally speaking how you draw a face. And then when you put in the hair, usually the hairline is just below kind of that bald oval, and usually the top of the hair is slightly above depending on the hairstyle. If you're watching this and you have more interest in learning how to invent faces sort of out of your own mind, like you're interested in the basic structure of a face and then you want to sort of create characters or whimsical faces from that, I would suggest watching Campbell's YouTube channel. I'll link it in the description. Today we're going to be drawing a specific image. We're going to be breaking down my tips for that, how exactly I drew this woman's face. So let's get into it. I'll begin by discussing what I meant by a less is more strategy regarding teeth first. I'll be cutting to other images just for a little while I discuss this, but looking at the teeth you can see I've not drawn lines all the way around it. I'm leaving breaks in between the lines, allowing the viewer to fill in this empty space with their mind. What it does is it avoids the teeth looking overworked and over-rendered. This strategy of leaving breaks in lines at the highlights has a wonderful effect on all the features of the face, including closed lips, nose, and eyes. You can see here that I emphasize only the darkest parts of the outside of the lips, underneath the lower lip, right above the upper lip, but I don't draw those lines all the way out to the corners of the mouths. I recently realized in my own drawing that I was forgetting this rule when it came to drawing eyes, and it was really negatively affecting the result I was getting, and I think you'll see that once I remembered to do this, it had a huge effect on the final outcome. Now back to our lovely nose ring lady. I did want to mention really quick that I did pay for this image from a stock photo website, royalty free, so I do believe it is well within my right to show it to you since I will not be selling the results. You can see fairly early I do draw that hair coming into her face because it does affect where that eye ends. When you're drawing a portrait of a specific person, the crease over the eye and then the distance from that crease and the eye up to the eyebrow is extremely unique on everybody, as is the general shape of eyebrows. So focusing in on whether there is a large space between the crease of the eye and up to the eyebrow and large eyebrows, or skinny eyebrows and a skinny space, really affects how much your sketch will look like the actual person. In this strategy of not drawing too many lines, I spend quite a bit of time early on sort of patching in the darkest areas. A reference image like this is very nice for this style and this way of working because there's a pretty dramatic lighting situation happening, which is part of the reason why I chose this image for this video. You can see that the edges of almost everything at this point is very blurry. There will be a darker, sharper pencil coming in towards the end for emphasis and adding in some sharp lines, but at this point we're still just trying to keep everything loose. You don't want to commit too much to anything. Give yourself room to sort of smudge around and adjust, and that room to tweak is what's going to help you get it looking like the person. Here, this young lady has very unique lips, so I'm just working and seeing what's the darkest areas of the lips that I see, the darkest areas right under the teeth. Of course, I did not draw a line all the way down those front two teeth to avoid that buck-tooth look. It's a pretty universal rule that if you were to visually draw a line from the center of the eyes down the face, that's about where the corner of the mouth will end. And I have found that that does seem to generally be true on most people. On the other hand, the space between the bottom of the nose and the top of the upper lip, where that divot, Google tells me it's called a philtrum, lives, that space varies greatly on people. So when you're doing a portrait, focusing on how tall or short that area is going to have a huge effect on how realistic your outcome is. Here you'll see I'll start to work on getting her chin and lower jawline just right, and I end up really working in a highlight that transitions from the lower chin down into the neck, and this is a great way to again avoid lines but use a natural sort of burst of light to move from one space to another. Has a great effect when you can find those moments in a reference photo. At this point I start to work out the shape of her face, and you might even find it helpful when you're drawing faces to line a pencil up with the angles of a face and then compare that to the angles you've drawn on your paper to help you get that right shape. This young lady has a very long, angular face, prominent cheekbones, prominent jaw, and I really want to make sure we see that. Now I'm still using the same colored pencil that I started with, same shade, but I start to go in and really work out all the darkest areas that I see. So right here I'm smudging in the darkness that will eventually be the eyelashes, and the darkness that will be the eye. You'll see I didn't even finish the lower circle of the eye or the lower line of the eye to continue with that less is more feel. Earlier when I said the crease above the eye is very unique on everybody, what I was saying is that the shape of it varies a lot on different people. So this young lady has kind of a very traditional how you would expect that crease to sit. It sort of arches in the same shape as the upper lid fairly closely. If you really pay attention to references of different people, you'll find that sometimes this crease maybe sits very flat at the top and then juts down angularly at the ends. Sometimes they sit close down to the upper eyelash line. Sometimes they sit sort of in the middle of the space between the upper eye line and the eyebrow. And that's what I meant by focusing in on those shapes. Those little details is what makes a portrait look like the person. Now, being comfortable drawing people and faces does not happen overnight. It takes a lot of practice. At the very beginning I said I'm trying to give tips so that you can in a fairly reasonable amount of time, be able to render a portrait that looks like a specific person, but what a reasonable period of time means is different for everybody based on their experience. I've been drawing people for over 10 years, and even now, if I don't practice for a while and I try to come back to it, I'm clearly, very obviously rusty. The key is really getting comfortable with disconnecting from the fact that you're drawing a person. So when you're drawing an eye, you're not thinking so much about the fact that I'm drawing an eye and trying to make it look like what your brain thinks an eye should look like. It's about seeing your reference and letting your brain focus completely on the tiny little quadrant of color and shade, dark and light, and just trying to translate patterns and how that pattern sits in relation to the rest of the patterns, the dark and the light. And when you get comfortable at just working out these little bits of shape and line, pretty soon you'll find that they sit pleasingly around one another. I have a theory that one of the best ways to practice this is to actually draw flowers. And the reason I say this, I spent a lot of time in my high school years drawing flowers, and looking back, the nice thing about, let's say, a rose is that there's a lot of complicated lines and movement. So you can focus in and try and mimic the lines and the movement. And in the end, if you're a little bit off, your flower is still going to look like a flower. What often trips people up about drawing the human body is our mind is so wired to want everything about the human proportions to be visually correct. And so, when it doesn't come out right, it upsets us. Where the flower, even if the petals sit differently than the reference, you're still going to have a pleasing result. And if you work and work and work, one day you'll find that your drawing of a flower looks like your reference of a flower. This is a good exercise maybe to do in conjunction with working on drawing people, in a way of training your mind to simply follow lines. Now, getting back to talking about this drawing specifically, at this point I have brought in a darker pencil. Personally, I did this whole drawing with only two shades, a gray Prismacolor colored pencil, and then I brought in an 8B dark charcoal pencil. And I'm still being very sparing about what I sharpen and what I darken. I'm looking at the image, and only the darkest, sharpest parts that jump out at me from the picture get emphasized and sharpened in the drawing. You do have to be open to allowing your mind to do some contradictory things. And what I mean by that is, earlier I said, when you're drawing an eye, don't just think about the fact that you're drawing an eye and just draw an almond shape the way your brain thinks an eye should look. You should be looking at your reference and focusing in on how that pattern you're looking at translates into the pattern you're drawing. However, if you become too focused on only ever looking at the tiny little section you're drawing and never checking how they're sitting overall in relation to one another, you can get a lot of distortion as well. Examples of this would be a face that was drawn, and in the end it seems that maybe the eyes are very small and then the nose is very wide. Things like that, where the size of the section you're working on ended up being in direct relation to how focused you were on the details. To avoid this, you want to be continually stepping back from the very beginning of your drawing and checking things like, if you were to draw an imaginary line up from the outer creases of the nose up to the eyes, where would that line sit? Would it be directly at the tear ducts? And then when you look at your reference, is that how wide the nose is in the picture? Again, if you were to imagine a line going straight up the face, where on the eye does the outer crease of the nose sit? Where, if you were to draw a line visually from, say, the lower ears across the face, is this person's ears directly in line with their nose? Is it a little high? Is it a little low? Other pain points that people tend to not focus closely enough on are the size of the forehead. Often it can be too small or too big, and where the neck comes down off of the jawline. In the end, the best thing that's going to improve your ability to draw a portrait is practice, and remembering that all of us, when we started out, were drawing horrible portraits. Thanks for sticking through till the end of that. If you have any questions, please feel free to write them in the comments section and I will get back to you. If you haven't already subscribed to my channel, consider giving that a try. I have a variety of fun art stuff. And I'm happy to have spent this time with you. Have a wonderful day. Hopefully I'll see you soon.